I think we have had a pause on people joining. So what I think we will do is to start the webinar. Before we do start, I did want to just read out our disclaimer, which is that this interpretation was recorded live and may contain errors due to the live nature of the content, unknown speakers, and limited preparation materials. The intention is to provide a true and accurate interpretation, which is tailored purely to the needs of those present. Please keep this in mind when watching. Thank you. Thank you all for joining today. This week's conference webinar is sponsored by Glean, and we're very grateful for their sponsorship. And there's more information on the website about that. This week we will be discussing the topic of embedding intersectionality, building on the CPD event that we had recently on decolonising the disability service that was led by the work at De Montfort University. We have a wonderful panel of speakers. And I'm not going to go into their sort of biographies and background extensively. That information is all on our website, and I encourage you all to have a look at what's on there. But we will be led by Chico, who is another one of the directors at NADP, who will be giving an overview of intersectionality. Moving on to Atif, who is the CEO of Diversity and Ability. And following Atif will be Piers, who is current student voice representation for the Disabled Students Commission, and sits within the education team at Diversity and Ability. And I believe he lives and breathes disability and inclusion. And after Piers, we will be moving on to Joe, and Joe is the director of Open Book, and I will leave him to talk more about that when he speaks later on. And finishing off with our two student representatives, we've got Lizzie and Stephanie, and they will be talking about their experience of intersectionality. So I will swiftly move on to Chico.
Great, thank you very much, Alice. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm really excited for this session, and what I'm going to do is just give a very short introduction to intersectionality. And I believe intersectionality can be a really powerful and transformative tool, particularly for ourselves as disability practitioners in further and higher education. For myself, from a personal point of view, I recently actually used intersectionality as a reflective lens for my NADP Senior Accredited Disability Practitioner submission, which I'm glad to say that I passed. So I would highly recommend it to anybody that's been thinking about that. And it got me really thinking about my layers of personhood and the ways that I've sort of started to term it and feel that actually my intersections have made me feel anything but in many ways, anything but integrated, involved, included in many ways, and often have sort of felt like what I termed in that submission as outer sections. So this feeling of being sort of exposed with multiple, due to multiple sort of intersections of migration and race and disability. And systematically growing up for myself in a post colony, so a former British colony, and migrating to England. But in sort of my personal experience growing up, I was only sort of one of a handful of Black students in my entire school. And so this informed the way that I felt about spaces, student support, having had systematically very limited spaces where I could feel safe, limited opportunities to access support, share information in a way that doesn't actually cause retaliation or cause harm, which is hence my sort of framing of intersections as outer sections. But also personally, having sort of worked in disability support with wonderful teams over the last sort of 15 years in 2 further education colleges, 3 universities, I've actually always been the Black person in my team, one of the only Black people in my team, and very usually the only migrant. So these intersections of power and privilege, beyond just identities, but these sort of socio-political histories that expose us and sort of change the way that we view ourselves, or view myself, speaking personally, and professionally as well as a disability practitioner. Intersectionality allows us, I think, to make an authentic effort to integrate these intersecting systems for the students that we support, staff that we support, and also the systems of power, not limited, but including racial, ethnic, class, ability, age, sexuality, gender disparities, etc., and to contest the existing ways of looking at these structures of inequality. So how do these intersections inform institutional contexts, the policies that we develop, the procedures, the programs that we create? So what is intersectionality? As a brief introduction, fundamentally, it's about working towards transformative and radical social justice. It holds the possibility to be transformative because it encourages us to look at the multiple layers that we all sort of possess, but also the social structural analysis of inequality and how they affect us as individuals, as practitioners, but also the students that we support. So although the theorist Kimberly Crenshaw, who many of us might be familiar with, she introduced the term intersectionality in 1989. The origins of intersectionality actually date back much further than that. So in the 1960s and 70s, they were marked with the confluence of social movements during which minoritized groups, they came together to address structural inequality and how that impacted communities. But these movements were troubling for women, and particularly women of color, who were often expected to serve agendas led by men rather than being positioned as leaders themselves. And this prompted women of color to articulate their positionalities through the creation of subsequent movements and writings, mainly in America during the 1970s. Black women produced lots of sort of literature and publications to capture the essence of intersectionality, whilst also acknowledging the history and the role of social movements. And these collective narratives that we built in those decades were various markers of identity and experience, and they paved the way for the term intersectionality, which was introduced in 1989 by Crenshaw. And she published a collection called Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine in feminist theory. And she addressed in this the experiences and needs of Black women, and that's sort of her foundation of intersectionality, where Black women sort of fell into this chasm, this gap between feminist discourse, which was centered, and experiences which was centered on white women, and anti-racist discourse, which was centered on Black men. And so she started really the academic discourse on intersectionality. So that's how it came to being and became sort of much more popular. And in this 1989 publication, she describes intersectionality as a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. She later starts to talk about structural intersectionality, political intersectionality, representational intersectionality. So there are some references to that maybe we can share afterwards for those that are interested in reading that. But in the 34 years since, the influence of intersectionality has found a home within almost like every sector. It's become really popular, but with it has come this incredible debate and confusion on what it actually is and what it actually looks like. And I propose in this session, we're going to have some great panelists talking about intersectionality from different points of view. But I also propose that ourselves as practitioners, that we ask ourselves these two questions and sort of move beyond the questioning intersectionality in itself, but really asking us, how are we as practitioners in further and higher education, how are we doing or in some cases undoing intersectionality, and how is that moving towards this sort of radical social justice and transformative agenda. So I'll start with 2 points to kind of start us off there and lead on to our panelists and Atif after myself. So firstly, just looking at 2 points, or maybe provocations, in a way that our profession as practitioners can sometimes undo intersectionality or strip that concept of its history that I just mentioned very quickly. So firstly, intersectionality can be undone through our use of intersectionality as a as a buzzword. This kind of ornamental buzzword, which has, I mean, it's got a great feel-good factor, but just using it as this term to mention, in some cases, ask from a very sort of limited point of view, that dilutes the concept and very much, I think, the history that intersectionality is founded on. So it limits that realization of meaning and commitment for social justice without having to engage in intersectional efforts. So what are we doing to move beyond just the term, just a knowledge of the fact that, yes, the students that we support have intersectionalities, intersections of various social locations, various identities, moving beyond that, moving beyond our students' needs, moving beyond the data that we sometimes just receive without really interrogating and understanding it, moving beyond just the policies that look good without understanding the impact and the effect, the activities, the programs that we develop, and interrogating those notions of privilege and systems and power. And secondly, intersectionality may be undone in our profession when it is only used as a tool that focuses on the confluence of multiple identities. So if we just look at it from an identity point of view, that yes, it is about intersections of multiple social identities at a micro level, but it is beyond that as well. It is about connecting these multiple and intersecting social and historical structures as well. So moving beyond kind of this additive model of kind of just adding, for example, disability plus race and plus gender, and acknowledging that, but actually going further and connecting those everyday identity specific experiences to the structures that may be actually contributing to the marginalization or oppression. So how are we recognizing the intersections, but also calling into question some of the larger environments? So for example, our staffing makeup, our recruiting processes, our leadership, our student policies, our procedures, etc., and more. And so those two might just be sort of initial points to start thinking about intersectionality in a way that moves beyond some of our comfort zones and starts to really become more comfortable with the language that can start to challenge the structures of power and privilege that can lead to what I mentioned earlier as outer sections of our intersections.
Thank you, Chico. What I'm going to do is move very quickly on into Atif, just very conscious about the time running. Just also to say, if anybody has any questions, please do post them in the Q&A and we will have time at the end for any questions.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Chico. That was fantastic. Really, really poignant and right. So I'm going to just sort of continue on that theme and share the slides now. My name is Atif Chowdhury. I'm from DNA. Some of you may know us already, I'm sure. Diversity and Ability. And I just want to check the slides are up already. Are they? Can you see them? I think Joe's just putting those up now. So while that's happening, I just want to also ask a couple of questions and think about it. How many of you probably thought, there's 43 people on the call, how many of you have thought about or come across intersectionality in just recently? And just to think about that. And then to think in your own minds, why? have you thought about it recently or come across it recently? As Chico had really touched on, it's been talked about a lot recently. And if it's about Black Lives Matters and things like that, then that might be true, because that's a really big part of it. But also Chico had also said Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term first in 1989, but its roots are far longer than that and deeper than that. That would also be true. So then we ask ourselves, why is it that something that's terminized perhaps 33 years ago is only reaching us now? What does that mean as we as universities and practitioners and educators, we are discovering things and understanding them 33 years later? What happens when Black women or Black liberation feminists are saying things and they're not understood or felt or even talked about by academics for another 50 years? This has ramifications, deep ones, for our civil society, but it also has that for our students and the well-being of our students, the retention and the participation of our students. It cannot happen so slow. So I guess the idea is not how do we get to a conducive space that's exciting, that doesn't just speak to people's fears or defensive postures, but speaks to the participation goals that we all have for ourselves, not just through the lens of feminism or race or class, but the collective will of a civil society that we're all deeply connected to. So there's questions I'm going to pose through this space and really focus on the idea of embedding. And that's really the key part of it. It isn't just something that we can just be cursory passing our way through, hopefully ticking a box on, but recognizing our role, those of us who have power to exercise in that role, and those of us who are deeply looking and seeking the solidarity of people wishing they would use their power in a more constructive way. So it's big work, it's deep work, it's not easy work, and I still find it hard to do this work and do it in these 10-minute slots because it asks a lot of us, and it always does. But here we are. So I'm going to move to the next slide, which is just me. There you go. And we're a team of people. With, you can read about us. The website will be at the end. But 85% of our team is made up of neurodiverse or disabled experiences. It's a big team, and it's a team that's winning awards and bringing attention to even the goals within the United Nations. But more importantly, I fundamentally say we're this good because of the experiences that we have lived rather than despite them. And I think that's the goal, to look at the intersectional lens, to recognize that we are this good as people and communities because of these differences, not despite them. Whether we can speak about them or not, that is a different question. And I suppose that's the work at hand for all of us in this room. So on my next slide, I have just put on there Angela Davis, which I know a lot of you will be familiar with Angela Davis. I certainly hope so. But why am I saying this particular quote? Because often, and I'm going to talk about it in this discussion, a course that we are launching around these discussions of anti-racism and neurodiversity and how the role of racism and structural racism in particular plays a role. But in truth, there's no course in the world that can really undo the powers of structural racism in this country, because to a large extent, this country and the US and many countries, it is deeply embedded in the fabric of those countries and this country. So it's about recognizing that and offering that as a space of strength and solidarity, rather than a defensive posture that some people often have, especially in academia, to say, hey, it's not me, I'm not one of those, I'm not that, I'm not this, without recognizing what is the systems that we need to work against and recognize, and what are the power within those systems that are preventing so many people from sharing their stories and recognizing the barriers that they themselves are facing that are preventing them from participating so well in academia and beyond that. One thing that's worth saying is that Angela Davis said in 1972, in a racist society, it is not enough not to be a racist. You have to discover and ask yourself what to be an anti-racist. Our student body is going to do that. It already has happened. Goldsmiths will testify to that. So will Central School of Speech, Drama, and others. Universities are asking themselves, can we be anti-racist? Some are asking that more, but I promise you the student body will do it more as well. So it doesn't have to be bleak. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be hard. It just needs some thinking. The next slide is really about cultural humility. And there I'm really touching on that here we have a leadership responsibility as practitioners, as educators, as leaders, and as students, to think about how we offer cultural humility, to push through our biases, to recognize that we are here to strengthen each other and to recognize those who are struggling to share their voices for advocacy or advocacy support, those who may not even want to come to terms with those differences because they're deeply rooted to a culture of loss and shame. So we have a trauma-informed care approach to DNA. We teach this within ourselves and we teach it to others, but it's an important aspect of this, of getting this right, to think about what intersectionality means is also about recognizing how different traumas and barriers are affecting people and the impact that this has. So on my next slide is really just a quick slide, really. I'm going through this as quickly as I can, but making sure it's as accessible to as many of you as I can as well. So the question is, why is an intersectional approach so important? Well, those of you who are coming from different experiences, is precisely that. You come from different experiences. You are stronger because of those experiences. Some of you are yet to share some of them, but they all deeply matter. So you're made up of religions, class, culture, diversity, disablement, barriers, sexuality, age, gender. They all play a role in your way of mapping the world, orientating the world, and what the window to your world looks like. Some of us, of course, have more power in that than others, but it deeply matters that we exercise that conversation and that reality and share it with others. But it's deeply understandable why we sometimes choose not to. I would strongly say, and I will say this now, that if you are marginalized from the workforce or education access, if you found a way to recognize that you have to do more just to be in higher education or in the workplace, then I promise you, you're hardwired to share less in workplace or education because you recognize it's not in your interest to make yourself so vulnerable. But by doing so, you may not be allowing the organization or showing the organization what it must do to be better. But then the question is, why should you do the emotional labor? If it's structural racism, let the organization recognize that and let the organization show how to fix it. So it's a collective struggle, and that answer to that is really how I feel about it personally. It alternates depending on the sort of the mental health barriers I'm feeling and facing on that day. But as a leader, I have to anticipate these barriers every day. So on my next slide is really about why, just to think about it, and I will share these slides, but Black and Asian students and students from minority ethnic backgrounds, of course, have less social value in so many places. So that, again, as I was saying, is you're hardwired to share less. It is why you get so much more disclosure from some groups and so little disclosure. And I think NADP would testify to this. I'm sure you all do as practitioners, how few Chinese students will talk about neurodiversity safely or want to at all. How many, I'm an unusual person in the sense that I'm a brown man leading a neurodiversity and disability-led organization. That shouldn't be unusual, but it is. And there's optics to that. So people are often left out of diagnostic criteria because it's not part of their social capital. It's an issue of shame in some places. And there are huge levels of misunderstanding because of that. Or often people are misdiagnosed. That misdiagnosis is not a small thing. Black men are more likely statistically to kill themselves than any other group in this country, and they're more likely to face long-term mental health custodial sentences. But we're also not seeing the conversation on autism move into that space because historically throughout the 90s, it's been overly understood to be about white middle-class boys and IT skills. This is truly wrong, and it's not a good example of autism is, but it's one that has been sold, and that has an impact because it's not showing us what's really at heart of this. On the next slide is really about a slide that I just like to share with people and just say, look, true inclusion moves at the speed of trust. What I'm asking there is how we role model differences, that being a person who's been marginalized and showing that leadership in it can unlock things. Not always, but it can. And sometimes, and I say this as a brown man, I suppose, I will speak to brown colleagues and I will recognize a journey in 6 seconds that for some folks may take 60 years. And we feel those journeys, we understand them, and we celebrate them, the ease in which we can speak to each other. It's the same ease in which I think sometimes Black women may speak to each other when they're in a room of white women talking about feminism, and knowing that that version of feminism is never really talking about structural racism. What does that mean? It means that that sense of trust, when you see kinship, can be there. Not always, but can be. And this is to all of us that we feel that in that sense of kinship with different things that we face. But we have got to play a role of recognizing the structural barriers because they reinforce distrust And even talks where we are not really focusing on these things can co-opt these conversations rather than, I think Chico said it lovely, Orientalism or Oriental buzzwords. I think that was a fantastic way of describing it. So how do we get to the depth of something without anticipating why people have good reason to hide? Next slide is really just reinforcing that conversation I was happy to be invited to about the decolonization of dispute services. What does it mean? Why does it become such a controversial subject? That slide has been recorded, that presentation recorded, so I invite you all to see that, but really is about thinking about, look, how do we have a self space, a space where we can't talk about this in a sensible way if people are deeply afraid of what it actually means? So some people will be afraid of saying the wrong thing, so perhaps they won't say anything at all. When leadership does this, it has a huge impact. When anybody does this, it has an impact, but we aren't going to get to a good place unless we have people feeling a sense of courage to ask questions, especially those in power must come forward with that courage quickly. So on the next slide, it is just a slide for you to think about, but this is the map of Africa, as you can tell, no doubt, and you can see it there, but this is also about from the Berlin Agreement in 1888. What you will see there is every different parts of Europe that had colonized different parts of Africa and insisted the language it speaks is the language that Africans will still speak. The ramifications of that go on and they're continuous. Yes, of course, there are 400 years of aggression that we can comfortably come to terms with. What we've yet to come to terms with is the role that has played and continues to play on how post-colonized or post-imperial countries and organizations view themselves, and how they view their academic institutions, and how they view their understanding of what is a meaningful education and what isn't, and what are the terms that can be done in. I once said it before, and I truly believe it, the English language was a language that was taught down a barrel of a gun, and it was forced to trade and sell or not survive. So people learned to survive, but this is still happening today. And so we see a lack of disclosure on disabilities that can be hidden by brown and black people every single day, because they're hardwired to share less in order to survive and be somewhere. On the next slide is really about action, and I'm asking this action really because we're invited to do that. I'm coming to the speed of this as quickly as I can, but it's really about you all looking deep to yourselves and be excited, find joy in this as well. The diversity is about recognizing that we have to dismantle structural inequality, that we recognize that there's a process, and that we're not coming from a defensive posture that's deep-seated in a sense of guilt, but rather a sense of reality that says we can build participation and belonging, and we can do that through trust. It is going to take some deep work and a million different mutinies at different levels, and it may not get to happen in this lifetime, but we do start those and plant those seeds today. On the next slide is really a course. I'm inviting everybody on this, whether you're educator, learning practitioners, support workers, mental health, community workers, law enforcement in particular. This is what the DNA is doing. We are building courses and support. We do not believe these courses are going to change the structural racism, but they're going to be part of an invitation to many people. Many people have often felt these invitations are actually impositions because they're not invited to be in these places, or they're tokenized in these spaces. So here we are trying to deliberately make a conversation about the intersectionality of race and realities, and we're calling that neurodiversity, race and reality. So I will send that information on. It's a 3-day course over 3 weeks, and it's in hybrid. It's online with lots of reflective practice and timing, as well as 3 days of coming together over 3 weeks. There will be more information on that. On my last 2 slides, this really is coming to an end, and I want to just say this very clearly. And I'm saying this in the words of Audre Lorde, who said it far better than I think I've ever managed to this day. There's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. That could never be more true. And it's recognizing the injustice when we force sticky labels onto people and only talk about the good disabled person or the right disabled person versus disablement and what that's doing in the world. So I'm a big fan, and I'm sure many of you NADP are, of an author on the next slide called Paulo Freire. This was life-changing for me, as was the works of Frantz Fanon. As a young person, I found finally a sense of home in the works of Fanon, but also Freire. And this particular quote I want you to leave you all with, really, but it speaks to the heart of inclusion and the challenges of oppression and how we tie ourselves to the journey of our own liberations and not just constantly be confined by the voice of what happened to us and the oppression contained within it. I know that's deep work, but we're here to be meaningful and kind to each other. So I'll just read this out to you. Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes a practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their own world. Thank you, everyone. The next slide is really my contact details, and it's done.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tiff. I can see that there's already a number of questions popping up in the Q&A box, and please do feel free to add in any additional questions that anybody has, and we'll be able to come back to those at the end of the panel speakers. I'll move swiftly on to Piers.
Let me just go full screen. As I'm always often following Atif, we both work at DNA, as you might be able to see from my virtual background. I am going to be talking about changing our approach and converting what the previous speakers have talked about so far in terms of the philosophical and really interesting thought discussions that are critical into happening, and using my personal lived experience to put it into practice. How do we put into practice as professionals and as people the amount of learning that is necessary to get a better understanding? And I do advocate that learning is essential before we can put things into practice. Yeah, has it gone full screen on yours? If not, I will. No, that's not happening. Maybe. There we go. So just quickly a little bit about myself. Policy and campaigns lead at Diversity and Ability. For those that haven't encountered me before, that basically means I'm a massive policy nerd. I'm also Student Voice Commissioner on the Disabled Students Commission, and for the last 8 years I've held one position or another to do with student voice. I'm all about using lived experience to highlight what we can do in our practice to improve things for everyone involved. And I've also been a disability advisor and inclusion consultant, activist, working on everything from the public sector body accessibility regulations that you might hate me for right now, or all the way down to working with Unipol in student accommodation codes. So a plethora of backgrounds. So feel free to ask any questions you think might be appropriate. But really, what I'm going to be talking about today is the fact that as a queer, non-binary, disabled person, my experience within and identifying with myself and coming and exploring these things as a young person all stem from having to take an intersectional approach to my experiences and understanding how they intersect, if they do or don't intersect, and how we can, as professionals, recognize and support students who are themselves going through this journey. And fundamentally, it came down to me using the social model as an example, as a lens through in which to look at the other parts of my experience to describe how I was feeling and how I was expressing myself, and the whole disabled by society principle of the social model in terms of looking at the, yes, as a wheelchair user, as an autistic person, as someone that's neurodiverse, and all of the other diagnoses that I might have. It's the way in which society treats me that causes the disablement. The disabling factor is the way in which society was designed. And the reason why I'm such a strong advocate of the social model is because it's not often taught, but the history behind the social definition is anti-racism. Victor Finkelstein used his experience of South African apartheid to describe his disablement. And I used that knowledge of learning about him and his journey and coming to the UK as a refugee, seeking asylum, to then reverse engineer it and look at how I was experiencing, discrimination in the other parts of my identity as a working class person, as someone that's non-binary, as someone that is very openly queer in my everyday life. And it came down to how practically I have a social political identity, which is my capital D disabled, my capital Q queer, and the they them pronouns that I do use. and the fact that I am operating in an inherently political space, despite what might be happening in the policy sphere at the moment, and the whole conversation in and around identity. You are, by nature of who you are as an individual, operating in a highly politicalized space. As Atif was talking about earlier, how some people don't have that luxury to be able to share as much as they can or want to, given the reactions they may or may not encounter after they share that. We still have a medical exemption clause on our student visas in the UK. So it's something that has real penalties when it comes to disability if you're an international student. And on the right-hand side, part of that is an image which has two people walking away on a street holding up placards. And I'm a very strong believer in engaging in the political process, and it was through that activism in US when I had my role there, and through engaging with policy, that I truly understood how my intersectional identity can inform practice and how we can make policy work. And it comes down to looking at things through the barrier model, the social model, which says, this person experiencing a barrier, let's work out ways to support them. So whether I'm facing a communicative barrier because the international student whose first language is in English, whether potentially through imperialism and colonialism, as Atif has covered, or whether it is because I'm autistic and I struggle with social environments and struggle with getting across the point that I want to make. The barrier there is the social communicative aspect and engaging with education, engaging with services in a way that allows us to speak freely, allows us to share what we want to share, and to be in a space where we can get things wrong, where everyone can get things wrong, but understand that communication is paramount to finding a resolution. And the important point is experiences are unique. As a disabled person, my communicative barriers are unique to my situation. I'm a very good public speaker, but that's because I'm from a theatre background, and I'm used to masking and I'm used to engaging in that. But when it comes to another person whose first language isn't English, or who is also autistic but faces anxiety in a different way, those experiences are unique, but the barrier to accessing education, to succeeding in education, comes down to the archaic structures, the institution's way of forcing us to communicate by what is seen as the norm and what is normal. And it's that I want to put forward the suggestion that we really do have to ask ourselves in institutions, why are we doing this? What is the reason behind us doing it this way? Why can't we do it a different way? Why can't we be multicultural? Why can't we be intersectional in how we work, both within our day-to-day roles and our lives, but also in the policies that we implement and the practices and the assessment methods and the learning and teaching styles that we implement? I'm a strong believer in reading. For those that can't see, I'm holding up a book called Clip Theory. It looks at the cultural science of queerness and disability, the intersections between those two. Stat off the top of my head is about 3/4 of trans people, trans and non-binary people, also intersect with disability. And that comes with a whole host of sort of marginalizations in terms of accessing healthcare, accessing mental health services, accessing spaces where you feel welcome. And importantly, and this is really why I like using the social model to look at intersectionality, to talk about these questions of barriers, is finding a place where you feel like you belong. We know that student mental health is at an all-time high in terms of crisis level. We know that services are stretched. And if we can't build a sense of belonging for our students, we're not going to be in a space where they feel comfortable to share, not going to be in a space where they will want to work through the bureaucratic challenges of DSA and the institution's own policies regarding how they themselves access adjustments, if they don't feel like they belong. And the reason why I mention this, I'm sure the previous speakers have touched on it already, and I know that, and the people after me will, is that no one space allows me to feel engaged and comfortable at the moment. No disabled space gives me the opportunity to be as queer and non-binary as I like to be. No LGBT space does that. And it's important that when we're looking at how disability services work with others, the student unions learn from you and you learn from them in terms of practical approaches to becoming intersectional and producing and creating intersectional spaces that create a sense of belonging, create a sense of equal power, and create a space where people can share the barriers that they face in their own way, so that it can be actioned, so that it can be rectified in the interim and in the long term, so that we can overhaul the institutional processes that created those barriers in the first place. I just want to, oh, that's the question slide, but I'll just leave it on this slide. I'll finish up here by saying I can't put into this as much as I want to about my sexual orientation, about my lived experience, because there's only a little window. But at DNA, we love exploring these conversations, and we've done 40, 50-minute little episodes at some 30 minutes, delving into the particular intersections of disability and something else. So disability and queer identities, disability and women, disability and technology, because it's not as clear-cut as people think. And I can only say that if you want to hear lived experience about the way in which I've framed things, they're really good to engage in that. But I'm looking forward to the questions, and I'm happy to be the pincushion of policy, as I often end up being. So yeah, but thank you for having me and letting me waffle on about the barriers and the way in which I think we should approach intersectionality.
Thank you, Piers. I'm assuming those are free and accessible to all.
Yes,
Brilliant.
100% available on YouTube, of all things.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, just if you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A and we'll come back to them at the end. And now I'm very pleased to hand over to Joe Baden, who is somebody that I worked with when I was at Goldsmiths. And I'm very pleased that he's been able to join us today.
Hello, everyone. As I say, I work with Goldsmiths Open Book, and we work with people from across diversity. All of our staff come from those backgrounds, and most of them come through the projects. I myself come from a mental health background. I had a breakdown, spent time in hospital, I'm in recovery, and have come from the criminal justice system. Basically, Goldsmiths Open Book is there to work for anyone who's been written off by a provision guided by a sort of lazy bigotry in relation to what we can achieve. Today, I'm going to concentrate on class, and I want to get across straight away that when I talk about working class people, I mean all working class people, who, though they may have some nuanced differences in relation to what works for them, have a commonality that is widely ignored and often scorned by people who I think should know better. I'm going to apologise in advance for any generalisations that might filter in, but only to the innocent. I want to point out also, really, that I don't have a political axe to grind. I'm not in a class war. I'm neither proud or ashamed of being working class. It's not something I've achieved. It's just what I am. And I happen to have some of my best friends in middle class. Anyway, so I'm very proud of the fact my family, the fact that I had an uncle who fought against fascism in the Spanish Civil War and racism in the Spanish Civil War. Family that fought and died against the Nazis during the Second World War, and family who battled fascists at the Battle of Cable Street. I'm also proud that I come from a long line of people that have stood up for themselves and what they believe in. But I'll be proud of that no matter what class it was. So, as I say, my attitude to class is I was brought up by the strongest, most intelligent person I will ever know. To consider myself as no better or worse than anyone simply because of an accident of birth. I was taught that equality is not selective. And I repeat that, equality is not selective. Open books politics comes from what we believe. We don't believe and feel as we do because of our politics. And I would argue that there's a world of difference there. Outside of work, I still pretty much mix entirely with the same working class community I grew up in. And I've never had the intention or desire to do anything other than that. Much of what I'm going to say is anecdotal, and I've no doubt that there's some people out there who think that 60 years of life in a place doesn't count as much as a few hundred hours of analysis and academic focus. But what's interesting about Goldsmiths Open Book, or GOB as we like to call ourselves, is that we can come from both perspectives. We have the empirical research skills too, but we also have the lived history. Even so, I've said many times, I'd rather trust my experience of life amongst my own people than an academia or a politically curious that pops in like David Attenborough and sets out to prove what a good job it's doing or not doing for the underprivileged and so-called hard to reach. I love that phrase, hard to reach. Is there a more obvious misnomer? Is there another group of people we would blame for our own institutional inadequacies, or the fact that some are left perhaps politically disappointed that they're not welcome with open arms. It's not our fault. They're so hard to reach, or they're too downtrodden and know what's good for them. So we'll tell them what's good for them. Though I'm sure it's hard for them to admit, many of the apparently enlightened still ridicule and scorn the aesthetic values, attitudes, fashion, culture, and papers read by those that are so stubbornly considered to be hard to reach. And I know this because even now, my working class colleagues, students, and me experience it. I have to sometimes wonder why they actually want to engage with us at all. We seem like such a dislikable sort of disappointment. And then those that have failed to reach us have to go away and discuss what we need to do to engage these people and what it is these people need. That's another phrase I love, these people. Consequently, I have to say, despite all of our efforts to improve access, after years of work, we're still using that number, so we're still abrogating responsibility of our failure to the people we're failing. I've found that in the main, the community I belong to and its children still had the same attitude towards education as I did when I was a young man, and that was a long, long time ago. So why is that? Up until COVID, I would visit universities, and still generally, the only working class voices I hear are those of the people who unlock the doors in the morning and tell me to and clean the toilets. I've looked at loads of research and been to endless conferences to tell me how to engage with my own community, and it's led me to one conclusion, I'm afraid, and that is, if you need to research how to talk to someone, you need to be doing something else. And to be honest with you, if someone has to read a book to work out how to engage with me, then I really don't want to engage with them. I'm not going to claim that diversity doesn't exist in our universities. However, I would contend that it's a predominantly very middle class, white, acceptable diversity. I've been involved in endless discussions about, for example, our inability to recruit white working class boys into HE. Not a controversial subject, I suppose, but for me, it's a case of, here we go again, an academic and political vanguard on both right and left that needs to divide non-middle class people in order to remain relevant, as controversial as that may sound. The real truth is, I rarely meet any working class people in our institutions of any colour, religion, gender, sexuality or disability. It's always strange to me, mainly, I think, when I talk to the politically, academically political about the community that I belong to, that it's assumed that I mean exclusively old, white, working class, heterosexual men. I don't. As controversial as this may sound, one of our students once said to me, Joe, you've got as much in common with most of the white academics here as I have with most of the black academics. And I've had the same struggles. We come off the same estates, we went to the same schools, and we got bashed up by the same old bill. So, here's a question. Have we really been successful in increasing diversity over the last 20 odd years of active endeavour? And I wonder how many recognisably working class voices there will be at this conference, actually. You wouldn't believe the amount of times where people come up to me really offended to inform me in very middle class terms that they come from working class backgrounds. One even asked me why I still had a Cockney accent. Another accused me with a sneer of being just a professional Bermondsey boy. I am, but not in the context they were using. All this proves to me is that a recession with social mobility, as opposed to social equality and economic mobility, has led to an institutional environment where working class people across diversity are not allowed to be who they really are. Come along and study, just don't come as yourselves. So we either don't come at all, we end up being asked why we don't stay. I could give you a long list of occasions where those that should know better make university a very uncomfortable place. For example, and I'm sure people will be able to give me their own examples, I'm sure of it, but I'll use an example. I was once introduced to a table of illustrious guests as our ex-con. Not just our ex-con, our ex-con. Apart from the fact that I only spent, and I say only, it was definitely a couple of weeks on remand, and the last time I was in 1994, I had to point out that I'd done other things too. Still, it's nice to be wanted, I suppose. And it's like they've got a collection of us out the back, already to be brought out when we need it. For example, this is our gay Asian working class wheelchair user. I don't know. Anyway, the people at Open Book have got very broad shoulders. We're always shrugging things up. And despite the evidence of this tirade, most of us don't offend easily. But our staff and students still experience the apparently enlightened, proving how illiberal they are by trying to prove how liberal they are. As I say, despite what would appear to be the current evidence, I don't offend easily at all, seriously. But can you imagine what it feels like for some of our students coming in from similar backgrounds? Even now, we've got students who, like me, back in the 90s, tell us that they felt more comfortable walking onto a prison wing than into a university. How damning an indictment of our systems is that? Even me, I recently went to a very posh do involving the academically enlightened and realised that I still feel more comfortable when I visit a prison. And I've been doing this stuff for years. I know it's hard to believe, but when I began to study, it took me about 2 years before I felt comfortable enough to say anything at all. And when I did, I thought twice about saying anything else ever again. Luckily, our lot now have Goldsmiths Open Book to fall back on and really stay out of a debate. For a lot of people, particularly those with a disability, so-called social mobility means an educational with a vocational imperative. For others, education is for education's sake, something you engage in as a rite of passage before you decide what career you want. Most that they now, seems to me, is about jobs. It's one of the reasons we become so apparently out of reach. How's education going to help me pay the bills? How is university relevant to me? There's no one there like me. Unless you're deemed gifted and talented, our education is predicated on vocations, and anything else means abandoning your soul and your heritage. I've had a member of the apparently enlightened tell me that some people love cleaning toilets. Oh, what a wonderful thing that is. My mum was a young widow trying to bring up 2 kids on her own, definitely didn't. Another thing that really annoys me, can I say, is these romantic notions of the nobility of poverty. They don't help either. I've had people more than once, including from the revolutionary wing, telling me proudly that they always say hello to the cleaners and the security guards. Wonderful. I'm being told that I should acknowledge someone's egalitarian credentials because they would say hello to my mum. Well done, pick up your Nobel Prize on the way out if you want. It's all part of the same problem. Every day at Open Book, we prove that there are no such thing as out of reach groups. And I would contend that what we actually mean by out of reach is working class people from across diversity. And once here, we have to work hard to make our people feel that they belong. And again, that doesn't mean complying to some romantic ideal created by a self-appointed vanguard. We're incredibly lucky at Goldsmiths. Our recruitment and WP departments mean something. And I would argue that the majority of our colleagues are really working hard to change things, but not because of any political attachment, a particular political attachment, because it's the right thing to do. More generally, elsewhere, some widening participation activity has become at best an exercise in competing tick box criterion and a commercial battle over an already existing first-in-family market. At worst, it's become a platform for passive-aggressive, paternalistic, cultural missionary work. It's how comfortable our institutions are for people from all demographics that will ultimately determine our success. Not how often we talk about how inclusive or tolerant we are. Apart from that, no one really wants to be tolerated. Even at Goldsmiths, speaking of liberal thought, some of our working class staff and students tell us they still make them feel that they're not tolerated. Again, we're better off than most. We're relatively lucky at Goldsmiths. We all mainly believe in education for education's sake, I think, but we're not all perfect. And again, it's often the people who should know better that I think are the worst offenders. So our people have been delivering classes on, for example, academic language, social research skills, philosophy, working class history, to students in lots of different settings like addiction agencies, homeless groups, mental health groups. Most of them still tell us that they thought Goldsmiths was for other people. And we have to remind them of our original mission statement. The university belongs to them. Anyway, I better go on because I could carry on forever. I've got loads of stuff, notes and stuff I've written here, but I know that I'm coming to the end of my time. Whether I'm released from prison or from the local community, our students have access to a service where they can meet at the front door, at the front gate, to resume their education at one of our sites, and a range of academic and pastoral support we provide takes them from the start to finish. I've got to say, when our students get to university, they need to feel welcomed as equals, not as the other, not as subjects of either pity or suspicion, or with a veneer of liberalism, as equals. As I say, I hope we all believe that education is a right. So we should be working towards a culture that is fit for purpose for everyone, no matter what their demographic. It's about making the holes fit the pegs, not the other way around. The Ulster Something book is about personal responsibility and self-determination, not using a skewed form of empowerment. Our people are their own vanguard and come to their own conclusions, whether ideological or otherwise, based upon access to provision that helps them to develop their own critical thinking. And that's why what we do works, is self-empowerment. I'm going to finish up. Some time ago, before Owen Jones told the apparently enlightened that they shouldn't use chav in its derogatory context, the SU here had a tramps Goldsmiths, this is a while back now, though, admittedly, had a tramps, chavs and pikey night. The postcard advertising the event had a picture of 3 celebrating lads, one of who had a front tooth missing and wearing a Burberry check shirt. When I went to complain, I took out my front tooth and put my Burberry check shirt. Nowadays, it's not correct to use the phrase because Owen told everyone not to. But it always makes me wonder what was being said before the apparently enlightened were told not to say it. I always finish with it. A few years ago, there was a cap, and it's a shame. Nothing seems to have changed to me. A few years ago, there was a cap in a newly gentrified Bermondsey Street. It had become a sort of metaphor to me for the way of some of our institutions work and working class people across diversity. In this little cafe thing, there were walls covered with left-wing iconography, pictures of Che Guevara and Trotsky. And on the list, on the wall advertised, fair trade, organic products, prices that would probably have cost most of the existing locals an hour's pay. And at the bottom, in broad capital letters, Chav Coffee, basically instant coffee for 90p. And herein, as I've been saying, sadly, for the last 20 years, lies one of the problems. So I'll close with a Martin Luther King quote that is as relevant today as it was when he first used it all those years ago, and when I first used it in a speech 20 years ago. And that is, shallow understanding from people with goodwill is far more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people with ill will. I'm sorry if I've wobbled everyone.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I would encourage anyone who's not familiar with the work of Open Book to have a look at the information on their website and the work that they're doing within the local community in Lewisham and within prison services as well. We're now going to move on to our 2 student representatives. Lizzie, your camera's on, so I'm assuming that you're speaking first. Are you happy to just hand over to Stephanie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. I will hand over to you then.
Thank you. So a little bit about me. I currently actually work in marketing, and I'm about to study music business and entrepreneurship in September. Before I was asked to be on this panel, to be honest, I wasn't sure of what intersectionality actually was. I understood the concept, but I wouldn't have been able to put a name to it. And while Stephanie and I are both speaking on this panel as 2 students, and from student perspectives, we both have completely different experiences. And I think that's an important part of intersectionality. So I grew up near Dartford in Kent, in a town which has proudly sat on a list of the worst top 10 places to live in England, and is very much working class. And after going to school, I went to college, but I never thought that university was for me. I didn't think that people like me were fit for university. I didn't get A grades, and I didn't think I was good enough. And particularly wanting to go into the music business, a very male-dominated industry, not friendly, particularly for LGBT people, as I am, and not friendly for anyone who doesn't have connections or money, essentially. I finally decided to go, that I start university in September, and this was as a result of trying constant unpaid internships, which I could only continue with for a very short amount of time before I had to find something that would pay me. And I've been thinking about how I can interact with the career services at university and the wellbeing services, and what would benefit in terms of from an intersectionality lens. I strongly believe that every student receives information in a different way, processes information in a different way. For me, going for internships straight off the bat, paid internships and paid jobs, doesn't work because I don't have the confidence, because I don't feel that I have a place. But what I would hope from university is that when I go, there will be people who look like me, people that sound like me, people that represent the same things, that the same experiences that I've been through, regardless of whether that's in relation to my gender, sexuality, or class. So I believe that that students really, well, I can only speak for myself, but I think there's a need to have services that are open and speak openly about this kind of thing, that there are opportunities that that spans the range, regardless of whether you have a disability, whether your race, your sexuality, or any of that stuff. I also think it's massively important that staff have an understanding and awareness of the impacts of experiences that students from marginalised groups may have gone through, and how these interlink. I think that it's hugely beneficial to have a certain level of awareness and a conversation with students that is open and that encourages open conversation and encourages a safe space for them to learn and progress in their career that they choose regardless of where they come from. I'm now going to hand over to Stephanie, who will tell you more about her experience.
Hello, I'm Stephanie. I am a mature accelerated law degree student. I'm mum of 3. So I went through school, a bit of my background. I went through school, didn't do very well, hated it. Went to college, had a lot of things going on. I found out I was adopted, so that threw me. Really struggled to get any good grades. Went in and out of jobs, never felt really very settled anywhere, never felt like I belonged. And then I had my children, and I decided that I wanted to do more. I wanted to be able to show my children what they can do, and I decided to do my accelerated law degree. Being a parent and a student at the same time is chaotic. Funding, and there is very limited funding. As a parent, I mean, the amount of extra funding that you get as a parent doesn't even cover the extra childcare fees that you have to pay. So to be able to work alongside means the times that I'm not being a mum, I'm being a student. When I'm not being a student, I'm being an employee, and there's very limited time for anything else. one of my biggest frustrations, this is probably going to be very provocative, but one of my biggest frustrations at university and from doing my law degree is that we have so much of a focus on diversity and equality, but we focus on each individual type of diversity. So there's different funding options, there's scholarships, there's internships, there's work experience opportunities for specific like special characteristics. So you've got, just for example, you've got a lot of BAME community events and scholarships and things like that. There's nothing specifically for women. There's nothing for parents. That we're very unrepresented. And then if you look at law, law's worldly known as a very white male, middle class, higher class kind of job role. And trying to get into law, I'm on track for at least a 2.1, maybe more. But with my previous history of my grades being quite low, that was over a decade ago for me, but now they're affecting me trying to get into workplaces, get higher up, barristers. I was actually looking at the percentages of women barristers and barristers that come from lower class backgrounds. 15% of Queen's Counsel, which is the most senior barristers you can be, are women, and only 29% of judges are also women. It costs a ridiculous amount to get to a place where you can be a barrister. You have to cross and jump so many hurdles. I've just applied for one of the Inns of Courts, which you have to do if you want to even study to be a barrister. And that includes a full weekend, compulsory weekend of training, of meeting people, etc., etc. There's no opportunity to bring your children to that. There's no funding for you to have some support so that you can go yourself. And when I've turned up, to university days, events with one or all three of my children. And the looks that you get, it's in between. You get some people that are very, oh wow, well done. You get some people that look at you like, what you're even doing here. I think that we don't, universities they don't look at everything. Intersectionality really and truly is every characteristic intertwining, but universities are focusing so much on those individual aspects that we're all getting lost. And that in all honesty, personally, I think that diversity and equality is supposed to be everybody. Now, not one person is the same. We might all have similar characteristics. We might all be like certain, you've got women, you've got men, you've got black people, you've got white people, you've got older people, younger people, the LGBT plus community. They're similar. They're not the same. Not one person is the same, yet we focus on each type of area instead of doing something that is diverse. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers who have been able to present today. We're going to move on to the questions. Please do, if you have any questions you want to ask now, add those into the question and answer box along the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to ask the first question that we've got, and that is, how can we as practitioners begin to do intersectionality? What is our first step? I'm not sure if Chika, I think Chika's had problems with her connection. So Piers, perhaps as kind of the last NUS disabled students officer and someone who has worked in the sector for a long time with the student perspective, how would you go about answering that question?
Really, it's kind of what Jo mentioned, which is talk to the community directly. And if you can't talk to the community directly, Like, it's the reason why I love books. Is as a wheelchair user, I can't get out and about as much as I would like, can't communicate as well as much as I'd like, and it's engaging directly with the lived experience of people, and that alone will help inform your understanding and your practice of what you need to do for the community that lives around you and engages with you. And I'd also say it's about looking at the gaps in what you currently provide and whether it's actually fit for purpose. There's lots of questions at the moment about class, and DSA laptops cost £200. Now that's been the most clearly identified class barrier to accessing the most critical support for a disabled student in university for funding wise. And it's about ensuring that your university or your disability services is at least doing something to communicate with people, to communicate directly with the community, directly with the students, but also the people that didn't get in, the people that turned down, that dropped out, and finding out why, and then going back and looking at your policies, your practices, and what you do, and seeing if there's small changes you can make in the first step, and then that inherently leads to a snowball effect where you start going to your other meetings that might not be to do anything with your role, and you end up going, oh, okay, so how much is our accommodation in the student accommodation? How much more are we charging disabled students for an accessible room compared to the cheapest room that other students can access? And it innately becomes a part of the conversation that you're having, and it helps you build that wider understanding if you don't have the experience yourself. And then finally, if you end up if you're senior enough and you're on interview panels, making sure you don't have the really ridiculous requirements of must have a degree for a role that really doesn't need a degree, or must be able to carry 50 pounds and you're an office worker and they're just going to be working at the computer. That's the other bit, is if you're in the management, is getting people through the door, paying them enough, so that we can afford the stuff that I couldn't afford wheelchairs for years. I had to rely on donations because I've never had that money. I've never had that ability. So it's that aspect of just finding the small things, asking the questions where you're able to, and learning as much as you can in when you can directly from the communities that you previously haven't talked to.
Brilliant. Chico, I'm not sure if you're back, if you would like to add anything in from a disability service management perspective.
Hi, Alice. Yes, I am back, but I missed the question.
Sorry, Chico. It's how can we as practitioners begin to do intersectionality? What is our first step?
Yeah, I think I heard a bit of what Piers was saying, is about having those conversations, being curious about the students that you support, and really just starting to interrogate our practices as disability practitioners from a professional point of view. I think we as managers, disability advisors, we get quite a bit of data coming in constantly about who our student makeup is, etc. But often we don't get a chance to really question, for example, where the data comes from, and unpick some of the categories that we sometimes just inherit, and move on from there. So I think sometimes it's also just about asking those questions about beyond just our student makeup, beyond the UCAS categories, beyond even the ones that we've put in ourselves, but starting to ask for more data, more information about the students that we support, that can inform us in making an intersectional, in taking that intersectional approach. So asking the questions from our data analysts, asking the questions from the other sort of professionals that we work with that get that. And in some cases, for smaller institutions, that might be really difficult. So there might be qualitative ways to do that, and starting to understand our student makeup. And again, what Piers is saying, looking at those gaps of knowledge and filling them in.
Thank you. Joe, I think this question is for you. Do we think class is recognised enough as a barrier and impact on conversations around intersectionality?
No, I don't think we do. I think it impacts on pretty much everything. If you're coming from a particular space, you will have common experiences that I think often transcend some of the other areas of intersectionality. Not completely, but they certainly they certainly would have an impact. And particularly, it's really interesting. I worry sometimes that we try to be too prescriptive around stuff. And some of the prescription becomes almost dogmatic. When we, for example, we'll have people come in from across the road on the estate, whether they be whatever diversity, part of diversity, working class diversity they come. We might come in and call someone love, for example, yeah, and then be castigated because they're trying to perpetuate the paternal society. Basically, it's no, they've just come across the road and they don't understand how to engage. And so some of the stuff that's going on at the minute, I think, is really one thing that really interests me is around the Black Lives Matter, for example, the arguments around Black Lives Matter. And it's great to sit and watch people all sitting about discussing it, all being very, very sort of intellectual about it and whatever. But I think myself, how would Mark Duggan fit in this institution? How comfortable would Mark Duggan be, or George Floyd, or whoever who's coming from, how comfortable would they be? And so, as my friend Walter said, to me, it's really true. It's like I've got much more in common with most of the people who are coming from whatever working class diversity, and I have with most of the academics at the universities. And I say, I still, it's such a sad indictment that I still feel more comfortable when I go into Swaleside, for example, than I do when I go into a room of academics who are meant to be socialists, who are meant to be, do you know what I mean? So I think sometimes we over-intellectualise things. I think sometimes we should do things, and it's a bit of it's difficult, isn't it? Because what comes first, the chicken or the egg? But we shouldn't need to be teaching people how to accept others as equals, particularly when you're talking about people who apparently are the fonts of all knowledge. So class has to be a massive part of it, because my experience will try much more with someone of my age who's come from whatever than they will with most of the students at universities. As I say, it seems to me that the diversity at universities is a very middle class phenomenon. So class has to be at the centre of everything, I think. Sorry, I waffled a bit there. But.
No, thank you, Joe. We have a question. What is the business case for embedding intersectionality? Atif, I wondered if you would like to tackle this one.
Sure. I mean, I'd throw the question back. What's the business case for not doing it? The business case for doing it is fairly strong. The business case for not doing it is mental health loss. The business case for not losing it is reactive behavior patterns. Business case for not doing it is losing staff, colleagues. The business case for not doing it is trauma when an event like George Floyd and the systematic murder of a man watching it on TV affects your entire colleagues, your staff, your well-being. The idea of not doing it in a pandemic leaves a front line of a National Health Service deeply unprepared when brown people recover differently from COVID, in some ways harder than COVID, yet brown people are making up your doctors, your nurses, your lab technicians, your cleaners in the NHS that you can't afford to lose. So I suppose I really making that clear is the big business case for it is you will always be deeply prepared or more prepared for change because you've made up of lived experiences and diverse experiences of people sharing mental health support needs, sharing their realities and sharing access needs. And in doing so, it prepares you for the civil society that you're working to be in or support in or even just survive in. So I think the case for not embedding diversity or intersectional relevance to people's needs, I think is a case that's one. The question really is about how do we create leadership around it that isn't so siloed, where we've got mental health in one corner, racism over there, feminism here, and climate urgency all the way over there. Because we'll lose. We'll be reinforcing these silos. And what do we do when we meet a disabled wheelchair user who happens to be a woman who cares about climate change, who also cares about being paid fairly? And so we're made up of those intersectional experiences. And so the argument isn't about is there a cost saving for it? Because clearly there's a crisis that will meet every university if they don't do it.
Thank you, Atif. I think the next question, if Lizzie and Stephanie, you might have some answers for this. How do we get students with intersectional impacts to engage with disability services?
I think the answer is really speaking about it openly, and starting a real open conversation. Because, as I say, for me, I didn't know what it was until now. And I think for most students wouldn't be able to, if you ask them what intersectionality is, they wouldn't be able to give an answer, and they don't know that that help is there. So yeah, that would be my answer. I don't know if Stephanie has an answer.
Hello. Don't know too much about disability, I'll be honest. But personally, I think, yeah, it's having that conversation. I think that's something that we keep saying to everybody. If you don't ask, you don't get it. That's something that I tell my children all the time. If you don't understand something, or you need to learn about something, you need to ask the questions, you need to understand. I think we're so scared of asking these questions, looking silly, saying maybe the wrong thing, being judged, that we don't just get it out there and say, what is going on? What is this? And let me understand it.
Thank you. We've got time for one last question, and we've had one that's come in for Joe. How can we influence change in attitudes to intersectionality?
I think we just need to get more people from all the different backgrounds coming to university. But again, it's that chicken and egg thing, isn't it? I can, after all this time, I can still feel really uncomfortable in the university environment. So again, I think we do it. Sometimes we do over intellectualize things. We just got to do as we would feel we want done to us. It's got to be natural. We need to deconstruct ideas of power relationships. We need to deconstruct ideas of. I think the Audre Lorde quote that Atif came out with earlier is wonderful. Except that we're all different. We're all coming from different places, but we do have commonality. We need to get more people from the backgrounds with something, and the only way we're going to do that is by getting people in and then being reflective, so they can see people who reflect their own lives, their own experiences in the universities, and also not to castigate people simply because they've got a different culture, and that goes across cultures. And quite often, working class culture will be very different, no matter what your diversity is, to that of a very middle class culture. The way people interact with each other, and it has to be recognised, so that people, it's acceptance. It's about accepting people, not tolerating people. It goes back to that thing. I hate that, tolerating. That sort of tolerance thing is just, we just need to encourage people, and we need to go out. I always said that I'd stop doing what we do when people start going into Eton to encourage people to become bricklayers. We need to get more people from across diversity in our universities. Simple. And that way it changes. And the culture will change naturally, hopefully, although it seems to be getting worse, to be honest.
Thanks, Joe. I think that's all the time we have for questions. There are a couple more there, but I tried to pick ones that kind of encompassed the themes that people were asking. There's also been quite a lot of debate within the chat, which is great. We're hoping to build on this theme around intersectionality. We obviously had the CPD event on decolonising the disability service, which is available in our members area of the website. So I'd encourage you, if this is something that you would like to learn more about or or become more actively involved within your own institution, to have a look at that webinar as well. And we'll be looking to put on similar events going forward. Just before we end today, I'd like to say a really big thank you to our two BSL interpreters, Taz and Fiona. Thank you very much for joining us today and for interpreting this session. I also would like to just plug our face-to-face networking event. And there is still time to book onto those if you would like to. I believe it closes tomorrow, and we've got events in London, Wales, Scotland and Ireland. So please do book onto those if you think you would like to attend. And thank you very much to all our presenters. I'm really grateful that you were able to join us today, and I found the session fascinating, and I've certainly taken lots of notes myself and things that I can take back into my own practice. And hopefully we'll see some of you all face to face next week. Bye-bye.